Can you hear me? Am I here? I am hacking in to the Cross Politics Studios. This is Jason Farley here to take over and host from Spokane, but I have been taking the newest class at Pub University on computer hacking. And so here I am hacking this studio in order to take over and run it. So we have a really exciting show for you today. I'm going to tell you all about what we've got going on, what I've been up to, building an underground university for cross politic and the Fight Laugh Feast network. We're calling it Pub University. And the reason we're calling it Pub University is because it used to be, if you wanted to get an education on how to live life, what kind of person to be, where to go get the newest and hear the best philosophy and talk literature and all of the things, you used to go to the pub or you go to the coffee shop, and the expectation was everybody would get together and you would learn from one another and you would hear, and the people that knew the best teachers, they would rise to the top. They used to call coffee shops penny universities because a cup of coffee cost a penny, and for the price of a cup of coffee, you could get a better education than you could going to the universities. And that's the case again today. And so we've started an underground classical education where you can come and learn and get the education that you know you missed by going to school. Because the schools, like this episode, have been hacked. They've been hijacked. And so we're here to get that education back together and put an education back together that you know you missed because the schools stopped giving a true education. And that's been happening slowly over the course of the last couple of decades. You had really, what happened was the people that realized that the real power was in the educational system, and so they started infiltrating the educational system with new ideas and undercutting what the teachers had been putting together for thousands of years in terms of what a real true education was. A good example of this is just that when you used to talk about somebody being literate, that word used to mean that you could pick up any literature in your language and you could read it with just a minimal introduction. You just needed to know when it was written, what part of the conversation of the human race it was a part of. You could pick up the book and you could find your way through it. You were literate because you had a basic understanding of all of the literature of your language. Now they've changed the meaning of the word literate to just mean you can sound out words. But that's not literate. And we want to help you rediscover literacy and rediscover education, rediscover the great conversation that the human race has been having for thousands of years, and be able to join in and add to the conversation. Help your kids join into the conversation, add into the conversation, so that your dinner table, your breakfast table, the time with your family, that it can become an extension of that great conversation, right? That you can be leading and helping and guiding your kids through what they're going to run into throughout the world, and then help them become the kind of people that move the conversation of the human race forward. And so in order to do that, we've been putting together a curriculum. We just finished up a couple of classes, the kinds of classes that hopefully help people become wise. We did a class on the theology or the mission of God for the family, why God created families, what they're for. That one just wrapped up, and then we did our first apologetics class, and worked through the basic outlines of what it means to be prepared for apologetic and evangelistic situations. And then we've got a couple of classes coming up, and we're going to be talking to the next two teachers about our rhetoric class and about our first animation class. And the reason that you come here for those topics is because if you go to university for your rhetoric class, you're not going to get a deeply Christian understanding the way that you are here, because here you're going to learn both what rhetoric is and what it's for, but also how to use it for good, how to really use it the way that it should be used, and use it in a Christian way. And so we're going to be bringing in our teachers in the next 2 segments of the class to hear about, to meet them, hear what they are planning on teaching, and hear why their classes are going to be important. But here's the reality. You've seen or maybe heard of books like How the Irish Saved Civilization. Well, the way that the Irish saved civilization was that they kept learning alive when the world was turning away from learning, when the world was turning to foolishness, when the world was turning away from an education. The church kept learning alive in places like Ireland and in places like Northern Europe, in places like England, right? The same thing happened when the empire began falling apart. Where were they able to still go to for teachers? Well, they were able to go to Christians who had continued to study and kept learning alive. Well, you see that civilization is on the slide, right? It doesn't take a lot to see that it's on the slide. And, there are people that are out there trying to blame social media, but the reality is social media has just made it possible to communicate the disaster faster, right? But really the disaster that's happening is that there's ignorance has become something that we celebrate rather than something that we fight against. And we have a culture that is full of people that are easy to manipulate, full of people that are easy to take advantage of, and full of people that are easy to turn into a mob because of the ignorance, the lack of education, right? Because the Western civilization was built on, we became people that loved books, that passed on books, that loved education, because God wrote a book, and it transformed us into readers, and it transformed us into writers, people that read and communicated because they were made in the image of God. They were restored to the image of the God who spoke everything into existence in the first place. that whole education system that is falling apart right now, what we need to do is look at it and say, well, the education, though, is still available. And that's what we're trying to build with Pub University, is a place where the education is still available, where the conversations can still be happening, and where people with expertise are still willing to pass on what they know to the people around them, so that they can become people that pass on information to the people around them, so that civilization, even though it goes in and out of times of dark and times of light, that it can become that it is something that we can embed within our own hearts, embed civilization within the hearts of the people around us, and in our children, and that the FLF University can be one of those places where it continues to grow, and to civilization continues to grow and is protected and is passed on. So we are now going to get into a couple of conversations with our upcoming teachers. And so with that, we've come back with us after this quick ad, and let's talk rhetoric.
The American church really is gay.
Are you asking me out on a date?
Effeminate.
The Bible appears more to whisper when it comes to sexual sin.
Shallow.
I said, I want the African American 7.
And full of cowardly leaders.
Are we going to keep bickering over secondary issues?
America desperately needs to return to the Father. Either we fall on the rock and are broken, or we fall on the ground and are crushed under that rock. To fall on top of the rock and be broken is exactly the condition in which God brings reformation and revival. So which way is it, Prodigal America? Are you coming home to the Father? Join us this Reformation Day in Fort Worth, Texas, October 31st through November 2nd at Will Rogers Event Center, just days before our presidential election. and join with the thousands of us for the blessing of gathering together with God's people and celebrating God's goodness with beer and psalms. Hear from speakers such as Dr. James White, Pastor Toby Sumter, Pastor Doug Wilson, Dr. George Grant, Gaben Knox, Steve Dace, and more. Don't forget our Business Makers Conference, Jumpy Castles for the kiddos, after parties, single events, the Pastor's Luncheon, the Business Leaders Luncheon, and many more surprises coming. Fight, Laugh, Feast presents Prodigal America.
And we are back hacked into the system. And we're here to talk with Michael Collender, who's going to be teaching Rhetoric for the FLF Pub University. So excited. I was just explaining that one of the most important ways that we protect civilization is by education, by receiving the education. Civilization is the safest place for it is in our hearts and in the hearts of our children. And we receive it and pass it on from generation to generation through education. And what was centrally important to an educated person throughout history has been an understanding of rhetoric. And so we're really excited that Michael Collender, who has literally written a textbook on rhetoric, is here to teach us about rhetoric. So first off, what is rhetoric, Michael, and what is it that we don't know we're missing?
Well, rhetoric is the ancient discipline of how to persuade, how to communicate, and it's defined in a number of different ways. But I think one of the best ways to think about it is in terms of what the book of Proverbs tells us, that a wise tongue makes knowledge acceptable, and also that a man earns his living from the fruit of his tongue, right? From the fruit of the mouth, from the way that we speak. And so there's this aspect of truth-telling and communicating in terms of worldview, like you've been describing. But also there's a pragmatic side of this, which is very much at the core of wisdom, that we navigate our lives wisely and we navigate them strategically. And rhetoric is crucial for both goals.
Now, we live in a sort of day and age when rhetoric sort of has a negative connotation now. Sometimes, people say, "Oh, that's just rhetoric," right? But historically, rhetoric hasn't been seen as a negative thing. It's actually been a positive thing. And we can see with things like the State of the Union address, the most recent response by the GOP, that rhetoric is on a severe decline, right? Like,
yes.
It was just bad all the way around. There wasn't anything that you look at and say, "Oh man, we've got some great rhetoric going on there." It's been all bad. But why is it that as Christians we should be studying rhetoric? What is the value in it, really?
Jason, there are so many things you talked about in one comment that I don't even know where to begin addressing them. I want to just jump ahead and talk about a number of things. But if I can recommend to your listeners to watch my TEDx talk on rhetoric, I actually address this problem of, they said, "Hey, do you have an idea worth sharing?" And I said, "Yes, how we defend rhetoric." So rhetoric historically has been seen as a kind of set of tools of manipulation, right? Even if you go back to the ancient Greeks, and Sextus Empiricus recognizes this as well, where he says, "Hey, these are just tools for manipulating people." For those of you who have for your audience who may very well have a classical background, of course, Aristotle makes a different case regarding rhetoric, but he says that it's a neutral tool. And I would argue, and in fact, in my TEDx talk, although it would have taken a lot more time to get into Aristotle and all those issues, really my adversary in the talk is this one idea in Aristotle. Obviously, there's a lot of good in what Aristotle had to say, but this one idea that rhetoric is in fact neutral, that it's a neutral tool. And I would argue it's not, that rhetoric is actually a way to love people. If we have wisdom, if we're able to see things clearly, if other people have wisdom that they want to share with us, then rhetoric is actually us loving people through using wise words, wise communication strategies to love our neighbor as ourselves, to give insight. But the point that you were getting at regarding the State of the Union address, the Republican response, it's everybody can see. It's just right out there. I'm not pointing to anything that we don't see. That there is an abysmal loss of good communication in our culture. Across the board, we don't know how to understand people, how to persuade them, how to think about the way that information flows. And especially for Christians on a kind of macro level, we don't understand how messaging works. And you'll see all the time Christians, well-meaning, invest their efforts in things that don't pay off. There's even this attitude, if you've been to a number of large evangelical churches, there are ways of preaching that are mostly focused on entertaining, but not using those tools to actually communicate. And pastors are afraid to communicate clearly, communicate the word of God. Why? Because they don't understand these tools. They go to secular consultants who are telling them, hey, you need to do this, you need to do that. Why? Because as the church, we've set aside a lot of that wisdom that has been developed over the centuries that's actually really remarkable and is very much applicable in the 21st century and a social media age.
It is interesting that even that you bring up preaching, because when you read old preaching manuals, often they would be called things like a manual on sacred rhetoric, right? Or, R.L. Dabney's book on preaching is employing sacred rhetoric. Martin Lloyd-Jones talks about the need for understanding good rhetoric. Even Charles Spurgeon, he talks through what's the rhetoric of the rhetoric of choosing Anglo-Saxon rooted words versus Latinate rooted words, and how the different root languages carry with them particular assumptions, and so depending on your audience, how to choose which is the right language source, even for your English words, because different audiences are going to react differently, right? So the understanding of that God has built a world where words are powerful and they can communicate, and that you can make a really positive effect on people's lives when you know the truth and then you communicate it well. That's something that I think used to be considered a kind of a fundamental part of education, not an add-on that you go and get just for when you have a specialty. So what are some of the ways that just knowing and having an understanding of rhetoric, whether it's within your job, within your family, within your marriage, or within your broader life, that you find yourself saying, I'm sure glad I understand rhetoric right now.
Right. Yeah. I would go back in what you were saying to the example of Spurgeon and talking about the importance of specific words that we use. Why is he talking about that? Well, it's because he understood his culture. He understood the importance of the language and what it communicated, and also how Anglo-Saxon words are more visceral, right? Within that culture, they didn't sound like somebody who is living in the ivory tower, but instead, right, you're speaking directly to the people. This is the reason why Luther was so effective, is he would use German. He turned German into a language that was powerful and eloquent, right? I would take a step back and say that I don't think the rhetoric that we should be as focused on is in that minutia of choosing exactly the right word. That's very important, and that will come. But I think there's a way that we have to take a step back and think through how our message impacts our audience, and what is it that we aim for our audience to understand. How do we step into their experience? And I think this is a place where Christians across the board right now are struggling to understand how to step into the experience of their audience, because it's almost like we look around and we think, hey, we're living in a new world. Well, what's the way that we come to understand our audience? And then how do we take the message that we want to communicate and share that with them, with that audience, effectively? That's, I think, the area that we have to step into to understand what are the deep human needs that God has designed us with. What are the resource exchanges that are involved in in a certain situation. How is it that you lead someone through certain steps they need to take in order to make a wise decision? These are skills that relate to how you lead your family. These are skills that you end up using in business, that you use in sales, that you use to lead a church, right? The entire experience of human social interaction involves understanding how to use our language, use our decisions, and understand what they mean and how they move other people. And that's where I want to make sure this class is focused, right? One of the things I want to share with people is practically, how do you do these things? My entire textbook is built around understanding these things. And then once you understand them, then we can start talking about how to fine tune language. But yes, that's exactly what I want to cover.
So it's not just a public speaking thing, or rhetoric is not just when you get an opportunity to speak in public, here's what's important. Right. Rhetoric is a full understanding of how to convince people of things. You were telling me earlier that you even have a chapter in your book for young men to how to help a woman fall in love with you.
I wouldn't put it that way. No, that I wouldn't quite put it that way. That would be an application, but it's the way that men and women process information and the relationship between that and the emotions. So as a result of that,
yeah.
there's a certain psychology to the way that women are persuaded. There's a certain psychology to the way that men are persuaded. And there are ways that if you were a woman speaking to an audience of men, you would want to organize the information in such a way that a male brain is going to receive that, and likewise with a female brain. And if you have a mixed audience, there are ways that you would organize the information so that both audiences can understand it. But it goes back to this point of understanding your audience, understanding your tool set, and how to communicate within that. I think we all are aware of what Britt did in her response at the State of the Union. And what she's doing there is speaking in a primarily feminine way to other women, but I would argue in a way that doesn't respect the skills and capacities that intelligent women have. And as a result of that, it almost seemed silly, right? It was not a good move for her. In fact, given what at least the skill set that she had on display there, the better thing for her to do in understanding herself and her capacities would have been to give that responsibility to somebody else, right? To one of the other more polished female speakers, one of the more polished female senators.
Right, and that's something that as Christians, we should be comfortable with that, even though it's something that maybe our culture is less comfortable with at the moment. I was reading through Hugo's letters recently.
Can you help me understand? I wasn't quite tracking with you.
Yeah, I would just say that when as Christians, when we say, hey, there's differences between men and women, we can say that with comfort because we're not saying, one is superior to the other ontologically. You have the ability to say, hey, let's be honest. With the way God made the world, right? Women have these strengths, men have these strengths. Women understand things this way. Their brain works one way, men works another. And that was something that used to not be, that used to not be a radical idea. I was just reading the letters of Victor Hugo recently, and he says to a woman, if I were writing to a man, I would say it this way, but since I'm writing to you, and it's not an insult, he's just aware that men and women are very different, and he's saying, this is how I would communicate this thing to a man. As a woman, this is how I'm communicating it to you. It's that sort of historical being able to have that broader historical understanding of something like rhetoric. One of the things that is great about it is it helps you see your own culture's blind spots, in a way that maybe you don't see without a broader education, a more historically minded education, or studying something like rhetoric.
Correct. And I think you also see throughout history, there have been times where people have approached rhetoric in a kind of calcified way. You see this around the time of Finney, right? Finney critiques the rhetoricians of his time for being so focused on the minutia of how they structure sentences and whatnot, so that they were boring, right? And so he comes along as a not boring preacher, granted that what he had to say wasn't necessarily all good, but he understood the need to speak to people where they're at. And I think when we, especially at this time period with different gender, different sexual dynamics in terms of men and women, how they receive information, that we need to understand, especially on this topic, that we have to be careful not to completely isolate the way that women receive information from the way that men do, because we're talking about statistical distributions between populations. But within that, there is plenty of data to affirm the trend trajectory that we see in Scripture regarding men and women being different in the way that they receive information and the way that the brains of men and women process that. We can actually look at how that processing is different. It's amazing to me with the amount of scientific evidence that we have right now for the differences between men and women in terms of their brain structure, that we then treat them rhetorically as though they're similar. But also, this is just one aspect of my book.
Right.
There's a lot of other things that I'm discussing, but for that reason, that's what I'm getting at. It's so important that we be able to understand the needs of our audience, that we understand our own tool set, and we develop that tool set to be able to communicate to a variety of people for a variety of reasons. And it's so crucial for we Christians who want to influence culture to be equipped with these tools for theological and spiritual reasons, for leading, but also for practical reasons, for the provision for our family, for educating our kids so that they're equipped to manage their lives well. All of this is part of the same picture.
Fantastic. Well, I'm so excited to have you on board and to be teaching rhetoric at the Fight Laugh Feast University. And you can look down in the show notes and find a link directly to Dr. Michael Collender's rhetoric class, and go check it out and sign up today. Thanks for joining us, Michael.
Thank you.
And we are back with the hacked cross-politic issue. I am here with Lex Avellino, very excited to be talking about his class. I have taken over cross-politic for my own nefarious purposes in order to push the underground education movement that we are building. We are basically, if you remember the 90s, then you remember that the coolest place in town was the Viper Room always. And in order to get in, you had to know somebody. Well, that is what you're learning about right now, is the underground Viper Room of education. This is the FLF University, Fight Laugh Feast Network, bringing to you the new university movement. And I'm really excited to be talking to Lex because he's going to be teaching us a 3D animation. We've got our first 3D animation course. Lex, tell us about what you're going to be teaching us.
Yeah, so first, I get to give the good news that you don't have to stare at my face. It'll be Josh from our team who's going to be actually teaching the course. But basically, this came out of, we've been running a 3D studio for the last 7 years. I founded this studio back in 2017. And it's been a really cool experience. Like the high level is, I started out just me. We went through a lot of early phases of the business. I'm a Christian running a media company. And we've gone through a lot of really cool collaborations. We worked with Capitol Records, Amazon, Dallas Cowboys, Warner Brothers, Disney, Marvel. And it's been cool because we've gotten to work with a lot of big teams, but we were always that person in the works and the cogs of this big, operation where we're like, hey, we're not going to do that, right? We've also said no to a lot of big teams. And the cool thing, some of the cool insight we can bring to Christians in media and art is helping people understand, what is that like, right? Wanting to create something meaningful, wanting to be able to make money with your art, and just understanding, how do I do this from the perspective of, I want to be consistent with my worldview. It's really tough when you're in those situations, feeling like you're the stick in the mud, You're the one that's like got to say no, right? When you want to be able to push something forward, especially because it could be a big opportunity, lots of money. But it's been really cool because there's been a lot of times where we've just had to say no, but there's been a number of times where we say no and someone's come back, like Warner Brothers has come back to us with a different proposal, right, for the same project. And so like it's actually had an impact on, the art that's going out to, a live event that we're building for, or things like that, to change things to be more holistic, right? So been really cool. And what we're going to be bringing people through in this course is just introduction to that world, right? Being able to go from it's, going to be 7 sessions where we're taking people through the basics of modeling inside of a free open source 3D application called Blender. It's been used on some huge productions like Into the Spider-Verse and things like that. And going all the way through to being able to animate your scene, right? So we're going to be working through a cool kind of product animation, and students are going to get to work through this from start to finish, understand the whole process, and you'll be able to come out of that, for one, with the thing that you've created, but also the skills kind of go into the next thing too.
So what tools then are people going to need? Are they going to need a computer that can run Blender? What else?
That's it. For one, it's a totally free application, but also this is something anybody can download and work with, right? We can help people, if they're like most computers, you'll be able to download this and run it. It'll be easy for people to get into. And for people who are, figuring this out and trying to like optimize for their machine, we'll help people work through that stuff. It'll be very hands-on. We'll have lots of opportunities. People will get connected with our team and the community so that they can ask questions even outside of the working sessions, so that people can figure out, make sure this is working for them and their, setup.
Yeah. So as a Christian working in animation and in 3D animation in particular, have you found yourself generally amongst non-Christians? Is that or are there many Christians working in this field?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. The biggest thing is I really do think we need more Christians in this space, right? We've come in because a lot of people we work with, when we're trying to support a team, we've had up to 15, 20 employees. And as the team has grown, you almost have to take jobs in these kind of like larger areas, New York, LA, and all the work we've done is remote, which is really cool. So people are learning a skill set that will allow them to work in fields like game design, animation, product design. So you could be doing narrative animation, product animation. There's a lot of cool kind of fields you can get into through this. And you can also do this remotely. There's a lot of opportunities where people can be doing this work, pursuing their art from anywhere in the world. And you get to work with people who are working on large productions in Hollywood, New York, all over the world. But because of that, you do end up running into a lot of teams that are very secular, and they just assume you're going to be on board supporting the next LGBT agenda, right? Or for instance, we pushed back on projects that were just too violent, right? They didn't honor the sanctity of life, right? So it's not just, it's not just the gender issues that you run into. It's so much more than that, right? Where it's just being able to bring a holistic Christian approach and bow the knee to Christ in your work, while still wanting to get these jobs that are profitable, right? So it's a combination of those things, and we do need more Christians pursuing arts at this level, right? It is a specialized skill set, so it's opening up opportunities for jobs that pay more than graphic design or other like art jobs, and we need a lot more people kind of in this technical space because it is largely dominated by non-Christian perspectives and non-Christian creators.
Yeah. So this would be, so if you're somebody that wants to get into animation or video game creation, what other things besides that would you say this is a good entry point for introduction to?
Yeah, absolutely. So in just the stuff you're going to learn in these 7 weeks, for one, you could go straight from this. I mean, it's going to be practice, right? We can help people understand the right direction. We can get people involved in more advanced courses to kind of continue to develop their skills or just point them in the right direction. There's a ton of incredible material for taking these 3D skills and going into game design, product design, architectural visualization, doing narrative content. But honestly, I was just talking to somebody today, another 3D creator in our field. 3D opens up so many unique ways to do design. Right? There's a lot of opportunities, both technical and creative, whether you want to do CAD modeling for manufacturing, whether you want to do architecture for real estate design. There's a lot of different areas that you can get into from 3D because it's just a very open creative platform, right? When you're working in 3D, it gives you the opportunity to play around with visuals, working in a very open space. If you like digital content creation of any kind, if you're into Illustrator, Photoshop, being able to craft, digitally, 3D gives you the opportunity to do that, on a much different level. Obviously, you can imagine if you're designing levels for games or characters for cartoons, things like that, it becomes very open, right? It's very interactive, and there's a lot of opportunity with that. But there's a lot of fields people can get into, and we'll help them to see how this applies with the skills they're developing. But the stuff you learn in these 7 weeks will get you in the door, right? This is going to cover everything from, creating your first model to animation, lighting, and rendering to get a complete project. So you'll get a really good sample of the whole workflow.
Okay. What would be an example in pop culture of 3D, or just an example that people would know, this is 3D animation. This is the 3D system that we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, shoot, it started with Toy Story. That was the big first 3D production from Pixar. And I mean, today, Into the Spider-Verse. So there's a lot of stuff that looks 2D, that looks very painterly and more flat, but it's all done in 3D, right? And they're doing kind of unique shading methods to be able to create that. And so there's a lot of different kinds of art you can create in 3D. You can go from super realistic. I didn't mention you can do VFX, right? So taking your standard video cinematography, and you can add visual effects on top of that. There's so many things you can do in this 3D workflow. And for me, I mean, a big part of just kind of how this impacted my life, because I started off doing illustration, right? So I was in illustration, graphic design, and it was cool. I love those things. And that still applies to this. So people who sketch, right, who paint, people who do kind of either physical arts or 2D traditional art of some kind, all of that stuff applies to 3D, right? Because when you're making textures for a character, that might be something you actually paint onto the 3D model. So all of those kind of traditional art skills apply. You're going to bring those into this. If you have a mind for graphic design, that's going to apply here as well, right? You might be designing a scene and you're creating, the environment of a city, and you want logos in different places. Your design skills come into this in a bunch of ways: color theory, lighting, all of those things come into 3D, and that's the beautiful thing about it. But the way this impacted me and kind of improved my life personally was it just opened a lot of doors, right? It is a technical skill set that is still more niche. It's becoming a lot more popular, and the software is more accessible, but it's still more niche in the sense that there are a lot of opportunities for these kinds of creators, right? It's a higher paying career as well, but it's also just very fulfilling because it's a very rich form of creation. You've got to think about a lot of different things. You have to think about light, but it's a unique form of world building when you're crafting a scene, when you're crafting an environment or a character, because you get to pick everything, right? You get to really be intentional in how you craft this. So for me, it was kind of a unique extension of my art and also of my business, because it allowed us to kind of tap into unique opportunities that other people weren't able to fulfill, because at the time I was stuck in this really broad area of graphic design and illustration, which is just a lot more saturated, right? You've got tons of people who are doing the graphic design thing or branding or stuff like that. And it really helped me to kind of differentiate what we were doing at our studio but also allowed us to work in a lot of fields that are just really exciting, right? VFX, game design, animation. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, next, the last question: Chuck Jones or Glenn Keane? Which is your favorite animator?
Oh my goodness. That's really funny. I actually don't know who either of those dudes are.
Oh my gosh! Well, it's amazing. Those are like the Chuck Jones is the creator of Bugs Bunny, and
Okay, there
he's
you
a
go.
big Looney Tunes guy, and then Glenn Keane is the guy that did all of the '90s Disney stuff. So
Oh, that's awesome.
he's
See, I can
well,
appreciate the end product, but yeah, the
right,
history
yeah.
of it, not so much.
Well, they're both. I just keep wondering who's going to be the next one, right? Because now that we've got 3D animation, we have the beginnings of it,
Yep.
where we have Pixar. They've done amazing things with it, and now you have some pretty amazing stuff pushing it forward as an art form. What but the you look at animation in the past. Glenn Keane, for example, is a very strong Christian, and he would make notes on which Bible verse was inspiring, this scene from Beauty and the Beast. He would
Right,
make a
right.
note
Yeah.
saying that he was making his artistic decisions based solely, based on his expertise in the field, and then he would say, "And this is the theological truth that I want to convey within this scene,"
Right,
right. Visually, right? So, and he pushed forward the in the same sort of way. You really pushed forward the understanding of what animation could do, and he illustrated that famous scene with Ariel coming up
Mhm.
with the water splashing behind her,
Yeah.
and
yeah,
she's and so I think that Christians in the arts, Christians in the arts, we just are not known anymore for being there and
Right.
really taking the craft seriously. And it sounds like this is one of those areas where Christians just need to charge in and say, "I'm going to put in the time and the effort." But this
Oh,
is
yeah.
a good beginning spot. What is
Right.
it? What is this craft that I'm looking at here with 3D animation?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I would say, just to comment on that too, like Walt grew up in an area where Walt in his life, I don't think was like any kind of devout Christian or anything like that, but he grew up in a culture where that was the norm, right? That was normative for culture and behavior and things like that. So it still governed the way that they created in a lot of ways. And now we have this kind of like cut flower ethic where businesses that grew up on the fruit of American values, Judeo-Christian values, and capitalism are undercutting those things, and they're going to die, right? It is the perfect era for Christians to step in and say, I'm willing to fill the gap and pick up where we left off with those principles. But the problem is we have so many Christians who have basically opted out, or they've opted out their values from the work they're doing in the field. And so we need people who are not just going to enter into these fields, but enter in with all of their values, with their worldview, and apply that to what they're doing, right? Not try to be a neutral party in this process, but actually, enter into animation for the kingdom and creating in that way.
Yeah, you spend a lot of my day talking with Christian creators, and it's been really interesting to hear some of the Christians' stories that they really they live as public Christians. Everybody knows they're a Christian, and they get some job where they have to fight for what they value in a writer's room. I remember one guy I was talking to. He had written on a really big sitcom and he would say, "Look, it is not anywhere near a Christian sitcom." He said it's the third worst show on television. And he said it would be the worst show on television if I wasn't in the room.
That's
consistently fighting. But he said my job. He was a joke writer. And he said if there was a joke that I thought that joke is inappropriate, too raunchy, he would have to put forward a joke that was funnier.
Right.
To get his worldview in there, and they knew that's what he was doing.
Yep.
He wasn't hiding it, but they also knew that he consistently put forward the funniest jokes.
Yeah.
And so they were okay with him saying like, "Hey, I don't want that immoral joke. I'm going to try to write a moral joke that's funnier."
Right.
And he said, "I didn't always win." Right. But it was that he was there, being consistently holding back this show, or orienting this show, and everybody knew he was doing it, but he was so good at his job that they were like, well, it's okay, he's one of the funniest guys in the room. So so we do need Christians that take their craft seriously in the arts, and dive in and live as public Christians, because the other option is there are Christians that are out there just hiding their faith.
Yep,
hiding
100%.
their light under a bushel, and that's they're of no use to anyone either.
Right. Exactly right. Not being salt and light in the world, preserving from the corruption of sin. And it's interesting because we need the thing that we replace the garbage with in media can't be Hallmark videos, right? Like,
right.
It actually has to be quality, right? Or else people won't buy it. Now, people buy the Hallmark videos, so maybe that's not the best example.
Yeah.
But it has to be quality, right? It has to excel beyond that, or we can't replace mainstream media, right? We can't replace, the monolith that is Disney, even. And again, they've given up creating quality, right? Because they've been cut off from their roots. Now they're creating for an obvious and abhorrent agenda, right? And nobody actually wants to watch that, right? But they're willing to, invest in this, because ultimately it fits their new tainted worldview, right?
Yeah.
And
but they can only get away with it so long as there isn't any competition in the market.
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, here's the thing: they've got enough money; they can get away with it for a long time, but not forever, right?
Right.
And exactly, you speed up this process and just allow them to move on. If we create real competition, we get real options for people to watch something better, right? So,
yeah, that's what you've seen with people move further and further away from Disney, the more options there are. When there was nothing but Disney, there was nothing but Disney, right? And so they could do whatever they wanted. As soon as DreamWorks comes along, Sony Animation comes along, you start getting competition. It forces Disney to have to say, okay, well, what it did historically was it forced Disney to buy Pixar, but that was an overall benefit, because the much better, more wholesome stories that came out of that era were because as they failed over against the competition, they had to go back to their roots to a certain extent, and tell better stories. Now what happens over and over is you get a monolithic media wall, and unless we are good at our jobs in creating entertaining media, you don't get anything different, and you don't force them to do anything different. Horace, the Roman philosopher Horace, says, "He who entertains best educates most."
Yep.
So that's a dig into your craft moment, right? We've got to dig into our crafts and get good at animation, storytelling, music, all of those things, and step into the storytelling contest that we've been in since the serpent in the garden said, "Hath God said?" He offered a different story. He went into a storytelling contest with God, and unfortunately, Adam and Eve jumped on his side out the gate, and so we've been having to fight back. But it's a storytelling contest that we're in. It's a storytelling war that we've been in since Cain and Abel. So
and the unique thing about we have better tools than ever. I told somebody recently that one of my goals personally with my art is that I want to do what Tolkien did in kind of the richness of the world building, but with the tools that we have today, right? And for people who want to operate on that level, we have such a unique set of tools to tell interactive stories, right? Games, in so many ways, people see it as a waste of time for people just plugging hours into Call of Duty or whatever it may be. And I can appreciate that, except for it is an incredible storytelling methodology, right? And even in something like, guys, young men or older men even, playing Call of Duty, Fortnite, like these competitive games, like there's a story they're being told about. I mean, I think men probably need more competition in their lives, more ability to, and probably in a less toxic way than the video games. But that's part of it, right? And so, okay, fine, let's tell better stories. Let's make gaming, right? Whatever you want to contribute to with this kind of 3D skill set, whether it's games, movies, let's make these things better stories. Let's make it holistic, right? Because I think gaming is a huge opportunity to tap into a young market, I mean, a number of generations that grew up with this as the storytelling methodology, right? Ever since like the early days of Nintendo. And plus, this also gives the ability to tap into a lot of other areas as well, from filmmaking to animation. But I think we just need to be, like you said, telling better stories, because people put hundreds of hours into these things, right? Like it's the commitment goes so much beyond even like, yes, film, animation, a 30-minute series or a 2-hour movie. But then you have people logging hundreds of hours into a game. There's a lot of unique areas we can touch on people's lives and even be creating across all of these, right? Like you have unique IPs where they're in the movies, they're in the games, and Christians need to be there with them, creating, stories that can compete.
Oh, I love it. I'm excited. Well, one last thing. I've got a video game that I've been pitching to all sorts of video game creators. I think that somebody needs to make a video game called January 6th. And you start at the Trump speech, and you have to get Pelosi's laptop. I think it's a video game. It's just waiting to be made, right?
I love it. So you can't tell anybody this, but I was there on January 6th, so I can help make that game. Yep. We're just outside of DC here. I tell people we're just far enough away to avoid the stench. But
fantastic. Well, I won't tell anybody. Wink, wink. Well, thank you so much for having us. I'm so excited for your class coming up, and can't wait to see what comes out of it, and who is the new 3D animator or two that are born out of the class. And so thanks so much for joining us, Lex, and have a great rest of your day.
My pleasure, Jason.
And we're back to wrap it up. I am so glad that I hacked in and took over Cross Politic for the day in order to tell you about Fight Laugh Feast University. We've got Introduction to Rhetoric. We have our intro to 3D animation. So you have opportunities now to join and be a part of the underground education system that we're building. And what's so important about it is when you take the class, you get a chance to interact with these teachers, right? You get a chance to really build your knowledge base, but also to really interact and learn from people that have spent their life learning an art form, learning the art of rhetoric, learning the art of 3D animation, and really get going on this education. And this is something that really, the world is rarely changed by somebody at the top saying, I'm going to fix this place, right? The world has always been changed by groups of people that you don't see, that are off in the shadows, off in the underground, over someplace else, getting an education, transforming the world, creating art, serving their people, serving their neighbor. Those are really the most powerful and important places when you look at the history of the world, right? Every single person that was a major player in the Reformation was educated in these small grammar schools that were started in the 1300s by a group of people that said education is getting lost, right? The brethren of the common life. Education is getting lost, and we need to. What do we have? Well, we've got a small library here, and what they did is they started pulling together the kids of parents that wanted their kids to have an education and teaching them how to write, teaching them how to read, and then letting them copy out the books. And they would create a library together as a small school, and then they would send off a teacher with that library to go found another school. And eventually, these little underground educational systems that were built by the brethren of the common life ended up educating every single one of the reformers that ended up changing the world, bringing the church back to the Bible, returning the church to its original sources. And it was because of this underground educational system, right? It was, and in the same sort of way, when the USSR took over and spread and throughout that Slavic the Slavic nations, and began to shut down or turn the universities into communist propaganda machines, there were groups of small Christian groups of professors that said, we have been given the duty of continuing to pass on Western education, continuing to pass on the educational system that we have been given, the great conversation that we've been entrusted with. And so in their basements, they started putting on secret classes that they called the underground university, and they continued to give out diplomas. They continued to give out the PhDs, doctorates, but and trained up the next generation of teachers in this underground university, because they said communism is trying to destroy civilization, but we're not going to let it. Right? If you want to read more about it, the Rod Dreher talks about it in his book "Live Not by Lies," when he talks about he goes and he interviews the children of these men and women that kept their faith through the communist takeover of their whole culture. The USSR took over their whole the entire system of government above them, and he went and interviewed the children of these people that kept their faith, saying, what did your parents do to help you keep your faith under the ruling, being when you were being ruled by the USSR? Well, every single one of them talked about the education their parents made sure they had, even when it had to be in secret, or the education they saw their parents give to their neighbors, give to the people in their neighborhood. They said, we're going to keep we're going to open our home. We're going to have people over for coffee. We're going to have people over for tea, and we're going to continue the educational system that has been destroyed by communism. And that is why their kids were able to keep their faith, because they saw that their parents continued to work to give and get an education in the Christian and Western tradition, even when communism looked like it was going to take over and win in every direction. I remember my dad coming down and getting me at 10:30 at night, bringing me up and sitting me down in front of the TV when the Berlin Wall was falling. And he said, I want you to watch this, because I want you to watch the Berlin Wall come down, because I never thought I would see it happen. I didn't believe that I would ever see the Berlin Wall fall. And he said, I want you to watch the Berlin Wall come down, because people in my entire life told me that the Berlin Wall would never come down, that the USSR was too strong, that communism was going to continue to be a major destructive force, and it was going to be the West versus the USSR forever. So that's the story that my dad was told, and he wanted me to watch the Berlin Wall come down, and I watched him watch it with tears in his eyes. He wanted me to watch it so that I would know that you do what's right in the face of what everyone is telling you all of the time, and because people are always going to be wrong about the civilization, what's going to happen, right? And so when they say communism is taking over, the globalists are taking over, this is where things are going. What it looks like to be faithful in this moment is to say, well, then give me the civilization. I'll protect it. Give me the civilization. I'll pass it on. I'll hold on to it. I'll give it to my kids. I'll make sure that my grandkids can get it. I'll give it to whoever wants it. So that's why we're building FLF University, because we believe that civilization is going to win out, right? We believe that God isn't going to let that civilization, even when it dies, it's going to come back. It's going to come back from the dead. Western civilization has died many times. It's gone to the dogs many times, Chesterton says, but every time the dogs have died, right? And so we're saying at FLF University is, give us the civilization. We'll protect it. We'll love it. We'll pass it along, and we'll do it in the underground, because it's not happening in the official institutions of education anymore. So we'll do it here, and I hope that you'll join us. Our next classes are Introduction to Rhetoric, Introduction to 3D animation, and I hope you'll keep an eye out for the next classes that come up, because we'll be consistently announcing and putting up more classes. And it's your opportunity to meet these teachers, get to know them, and be able to receive what they've spent their lives studying. So thanks so much for joining me as I take over Cross Politic for the day. And I look forward to hearing and seeing how you enjoyed these classes. Have a great day.